I think this war between Ukraine and Russia is really forcing us to reconsider how do we perceive Ukraine. We always thought of Ukraine and Russia as Russia's maybe the bigger brother and Ukraine is the smaller brother, and somehow they're so closely tied together, and who really knows what all the differences are about or maybe are not about. But I think what we see happening now is really forcing us to get a little bit into history and shed a little bit more light on what is actually this struggle between these two nations and what led to them actually being at war against each other. And why do Ukrainians really struggle for their freedom, and why don't they just want to be consumed up in Russia, in this big empire? We're here in Kiev, and that's actually one of my favorite places in Kiev because it's a very historically unique place. This is one of the last places where you can actually see the Soviet heritage of Ukraine, and you can see it in the architecture. So that behind me is the Expocenter of Ukraine, or in Ukrainian it's called VDNH. And this was used as a big museum complex during the Soviet time to exhibit the accomplishments of communism and of planned economies. Just because in recent time we see Ukraine fighting for its independence from Russia doesn't mean it has always been like that. So actually the countries that you know today as Russia, Belarus and Ukraine, they all come from one ancient empire which is called Kievan Rus. So the Kievan Rus was founded in the 9th century, and the reason why it was called Kievan Rus is actually because Kiev was the capital of the Rus. And from this word Rus, we find it today in the names of the countries like Belarus. That means just the western part of the Rus, this old empire. The whole civilization of the Slavic world, it actually started in Kiev. So the ruler of the Kievan Rus in the 10th century, Vladimir the Great, he first adopted Christianity, and then he also decided to make it the state religion. The whole population of the Kievan Rus more than 1,000 years ago was baptized in the river Dnieper that goes through Kiev. So Kiev is not only the birthplace of the civilizations that we call Russia, Belarus and Ukraine today, but it's also the place where the pagan Slavic tribes were converted to Christianity. And this is why we can say today that most part of the societies in Russia, Ukraine and Belarus are actually Orthodox Christians. So through various events and decisions in history, it turned actually out that today we have the situation that no longer Kiev is kind of in a bolder position in this part of the world, but it's actually the whole balance of power switched very much towards Russia. And that, I think, in the recent history, it's really manifested in the Soviet Union, where Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, but Russia pretty much was dictating most of its policies. That's the reason why most people here in Ukraine are actually bilingual and do speak Russian as well as Ukrainian, as in most of the former Soviet republics, and why there's still this struggle of the last 30 years of trying to figure out, okay, how can we actually return back to our Ukrainian roots and this culture, and to emphasize that more, and kind of to scrape off this whole influence that the Russian culture through the Soviet Union had actually on our country. All of us, we still remember the photos and the dramatic moments of the Maidan movement. They call it the revolution of dignity in Ukraine, because it was really, in 2014, a revolution of the people who wanted to have back their dignity and their basic rights of having their government actually represent their interest and not the interest of the neighboring country, which is Russia. And unfortunately, that is what was taking place. So people went out to the streets and they overthrew the government, but with many, many victims on the side of innocent civilians who were just protesting for their right to have a government that respects the desire of Ukraine to actually move westwards and to have more close ties with the European Union and to be more European. The Ukrainians, they just wanted to have back their dignity, and dignity in the very basic sense of the word, to just have a choice. The revolution of dignity was successful, and it overthrew the old government, and a new president was elected. And until this day, today, 8 years later, Ukraine has made huge steps to becoming a real democracy and getting rid of a lot of corruption. And no doubt there's still a long way to go. A big reform that came out of the 2014 revolution of dignity was the decommunization laws. The reason and the root of all of this is that even during the revolution, in the streets of Kiev, normal citizens, they had taken down statues of Lenin. The reason was that Lenin stood for them for this whole century, almost century of Soviet dominance, of this dominance of Russia over everything that was happening in Ukraine, and it became just for them a symbol of oppression. And it was oppression. If we study our history books, then we can see that Ukraine suffered so much during the Soviet years. So they really wanted to get rid of these symbols and just to have a new start and to get rid of this past. And they didn't only want to have changes in the political relations to Russia, but they also wanted it to be visible in the streets of Kiev and of the whole country. So since 2016, over 1,000 Lenin monuments have been taken down all over Ukraine. And this is why exactly we came here to this place today, and why this is a special place, because here you can actually still see a lot of Soviet symbols, and it's preserved here in the VDNH, the National Heritage Site in Kiev. Just as a reminder for the future generation, this is how Ukrainians used to live, but that there's a new time now where Ukraine wants to decide what path they're actually going to go into the future. I was always a little fascinated by this Soviet architecture. This is one of my favorite places in Kiev to come to, because it's somehow, it carries some spirit of the past and from a time that I was not born yet and that I just know about from history books. So I always found it really fascinating. But there's one thing that I will never forget when the war started and when Russians first occupied the Ukrainian city of Melitopol. And that was when somebody from that city posted a video online showing how the Russians on a truck, they brought an old statue of Lenin. They found it somewhere in the city. There was a place where they threw the statue, and the Russians found it and they put it back on its place in the main square of the city. So that was something that really, it shook me to my roots, because I realized my generation, we can be fascinated by some old ideas, even by the traces that we can see here and there in architecture. But for a country like Russia, for them the Soviet Union is actually, it's not the past. For them it seems to be the future. The future of where Moscow is deciding everything, where they're just imposing all their ideas on a neighboring country. And it's not only Ukraine that's suffering from that and that has that perspective. And we know that Russia has ambitions far further than only Ukraine. So I think we should take it very, very seriously, and we need to do everything that's in our power, or that's in the power of the countries we come from, to really stop this from happening. Because, I can go here, I can be in this place, and I can walk around and find this architecture interesting. But the reality is that there's a nation on this planet who wants to revive the Soviet Union and come up with a very, very similar, huge construct of a nation that really nobody of us can seriously want. When we say that each and every single individual has the freedom to choose for their lives, how they want to live their life, with whom they want to live their life, I think Ukraine has the same choice as well as a nation. So we should not allow our politicians and our representatives, or even our mind, to make any choices as to where Ukraine belongs. Does it belong to Russia? Does it belong to Europe? We should respect the choice that people are making for themselves, as we want them to respect the choices we are making in our personal lives. So me, as a German, standing here in Kiev in Ukraine, I can say I'm so, so proud to be part of this nation and to be standing here and carrying this Ukrainian spirit, just of solidarity, determination. They know what they're standing for. They know what they are fighting for. So pray for Ukraine and pray for this evil not to prevail over Ukraine. God bless you.